The patrol car glided slowly through the streets of Hillsborough in the morning. Cordell Maddox reached for the thermos of coffee standing in the cup holder between the seats with a familiar movement. He loved this time of day, the beginning of his shift, when the city was just waking up and nothing had happened yet. It was the end of April, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming magnolias. Cordell rolled down the window, letting the fresh spring air into the cabin, replacing the smell of cheap air freshener. "All quiet," he said into the radio, reporting to the dispatcher. "Got you, Maddox. Keep patrolling," replied a familiar female voice. Cordell had been a police officer for 12 years. At 35, he had a reputation as a reliable officer, although he had not advanced in his career and remained a patrolman. Many of his colleagues had already become detectives or sergeants, but Cordell always said he liked working on the ground. The truth was that he lacked the diligence to study and take the necessary advanced training courses. Weekly training at the shooting range and gym came easily to him, but he always had problems with theory. The sun was rising higher, and Cordell turned onto Church Street, where there were small shops and cafes. He noticed a familiar figure at the entrance to the supermarket, Tyrone Bennett, a local homeless man who usually hung around the shops begging for change. Cordell stopped the car and got out. "Hey, Tyrone, same old, same old?" Tyrone, a thin man with unkempt dreadlocks, looked up. "Mr. Maddox, I'm not doing anything, just standing here. That's not against the law." "You know the rules, Tyrone. Mr. Howard called yesterday and complained that you were scaring away customers." "I'm not bothering anyone. I swear on my mother's life." Tyrone raised his hands in surrender. Cordell sighed. He knew Tyrone's story. A veteran who had returned from Iraq with post-traumatic stress disorder, lost his family and his home. He had seen his medical records when he was taken to the station for minor disorderly conduct. "Here." Cordell took a few dollars out of his pocket. "Go to Jenkins' Diner and get yourself a decent breakfast. And that's enough standing around here for today, you got that?" Tyrone nodded gratefully, carefully taking the money. "Thanks, officer. You're not like the rest of them." He waved his hand toward another patrol car driving by. Cordell got back behind the wheel, watching Tyrone's receding figure. The radio crackled again. "Maddox, we have a call on Maple Avenue, 22. Domestic disturbance." "Got it on my way," he replied, turning on the siren. Domestic disputes were the most unpleasant kind of call. You never knew how they would end. Sometimes the spouses made up before the police arrived, and sometimes it ended in a knife fight. Cordell remembered a case where a woman who had just begged him to protect her from her husband attacked the police with a kitchen knife when they tried to handcuff her husband. Cordell pulled up to a neat one-story house with a small lawn. Screams could be heard from inside. He approached the door and knocked. The screams stopped instantly. "Hillsborough Police, open up." The door was opened by a middle-aged man with a red face from anger. "What the hell? Who called the cops?" "We received a report of a disturbance," Cordell replied calmly. "Can we come in?" "There's no disturbance, just a family argument," said a woman with tear-stained eyes, peeking out from behind the man. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Cordell asked, looking her in the eyes. Yes, officer," she replied, stammering. "We were just discussing the family budget." Cordell knew this song. The woman was clearly frightened, but she wasn't going to file a report. Without her testimony, there was little he could do. "I suggest you discuss more quietly," he said to the man. "The neighbors are concerned." Cordell left his business card with the couple and returned to his car. "She won't call," he thought, as he pulled out of the driveway. People like that never call until it's too late. By noon, Cordell had finished his shift and headed home. He lived in Old Hillsborough, in a small two-story house that he and Nyella had bought 5 years ago. It was then, after the wedding, that life began to seem settled and right to him. Nyella worked as a cashier at Harris Teeter, and although her salary was modest, together with his police salary, they were able to live quite comfortably. As he pulled up to the house, Cordell noticed a familiar black pickup truck in the driveway. The old Ford belonged to his stepfather, Julius Browning. Cordell grimaced. He had never gotten along with his stepfather, ever since his mother brought Julius into their home 20 years ago. His mother had died 3 years ago of lung cancer, but for some reason, Julius had remained in their lives, often visiting under the pretext of helping around the house. Cordell turned off the engine and entered the house. Nyela's laughter could be heard from the kitchen. Upon entering, he saw his wife and stepfather sitting at the table with cups of coffee. "Here's our hero," exclaimed Julius, rising to greet him. "How was your shift, son?" "Fine," Cordell replied dryly, ignoring the outstretched hand. "I didn't expect to see you." "Uriah stopped by to change the faucet in the bathroom," Nyela explained, getting up to kiss her husband. "I called a plumber, but he quoted such a high price that it would be easier to buy a new bathtub." Cordell nodded silently. He didn't like that Nyela called Urias every time something needed to be fixed. They weren't close enough to constantly ask each other for help. "I could do it myself this weekend," he said, heading for the refrigerator. "Come on," Urias waved his hand. "I was passing by anyway, and you need to rest after your shift. Police work is hard." Cordell heard a hint of mockery in that sentence. At 55, Julius looked strong and youthful. He used to work in a car repair shop, but after it closed, he got by doing odd jobs, mostly minor repairs. Despite his age, he kept himself in shape. He went to the same gym as Cordell, just at a different time. "Are you hungry?" Nyela asked. "I can heat up lunch." "No, don't bother," Cordell said, taking a beer out of the refrigerator. "I had a snack at the station." He noticed Nyela and Urias exchange quick glances. "Well, I have to go." Urias slapped his knees and stood up. "The faucet works like new, but give me a call if anything happens." "Thanks for stopping by." Nyela walked him to the door. Cordell heard them talking quietly in the hallway, but couldn't make out their words. When Nyela returned to the kitchen, he asked, "Does he often stop by when I'm not here?" Nyela shrugged. "Not really. Mostly when he needs help around the house." "I told you I can do everything myself." "Of course, honey," Nyela began, gathering cups from the table. "It's just that you're often on shift or tired after work. I don't want to burden you with housework, too." Cordell wanted to argue, but kept quiet. There was some truth in his wife's words. Lately, he had been coming home from work exhausted and often falling asleep in front of the TV. "Are you on duty today?" Nyela asked, changing the subject. "No, but I am tomorrow morning." "Why?" "Chantel invited us over for a barbecue. Nothing special, just hanging out in the yard with the neighbors." Chantel Quezada lived across the street and worked at the same supermarket as Nyela. They had been friends since they moved in, and Cordell sometimes thought that Chantel knew more about his wife than he did. "We can go," he agreed, although he would have preferred to spend the evening at home. Nyela beamed. "Great! I already said yes, but I was afraid you'd be against it." That evening, sitting in the yard with a can of beer, Cordell watched Nyela chatting animatedly with her friend at the other end of the yard. They were standing by the grill, where Chantel's husband was cooking ribs, and were engaged in a lively discussion, glancing in his direction from time to time. "Everything okay, buddy?" asked Marcus, Chantel's neighbor, sitting down next to Cordell. "You look a little gloomy for a barbecue." "Everything's fine." Cordell took a sip of beer. "Just tired." "Catching bad guys is hard work," Marcus grinned. "By the way, is that guy at your place today a relative?" "What guy?" Cordell asked, wary. "I don't know. I saw some guy come in earlier. I thought maybe he was your brother or something." "Oh, that's my stepfather," Cordell replied, trying to sound casual. "He was helping with some repairs." "I see." Marcus nodded. "Does he come around often?" "Sometimes," Cordell replied evasively, feeling tense. "Why?" "Nothing, just asking." Marcus raised his hands in a defensive gesture. "Didn't mean to pry." Cordell noticed that Nyela and Chantel had moved away from the grill and were now talking quietly by the garden swing. Nyela looked troubled, and Chantel was arguing with her heatedly. "I'll go check on the ribs," Marcus said, getting up. "I don't want Ray to burn them like last time." Left alone, Cordell continued to watch his wife. Something about her behavior had seemed strange to him in recent weeks. She had started paying more attention to her appearance, bought new clothes, and gone to the hairdresser more often. He had previously attributed it to spring fever, but now other thoughts were creeping into his mind. When they returned home after the barbecue, they hardly spoke. Nyela went straight to the shower, and Cordell turned on the TV, although he wasn't really watching it. When his wife went to bed, he sat in the kitchen for a long time, thinking about Marcus's words and Nyela's strange behavior. Could Urias be coming to their house more often than he thought? And why? The next morning, Cordell left for work earlier than usual. He wanted to stop by the station before his patrol to check some reports. Nyela was still asleep, so he left her a note saying he would be back for dinner. It was a busy day. 2 shoplifting incidents, teenagers spray painting graffiti on a school wall, and a drunk driver who nearly hit a pedestrian. By evening, Cordell felt drained, and all he wanted was a hot shower and a cold beer. As he pulled up to the house, he noticed that Julius's pickup truck was parked in the driveway again. What the hell does he want now? Cordell thought as he parked next to it. He entered the house and heard voices coming from the kitchen. Moving silently, as he had learned over the years, he moved closer. "I have to tell him," Julius was saying. "We can't go on like this, Nyla." "I know, but he won't understand. You know how he is." "We can't hide forever. I'm tired of it." Cordell froze a few steps from the kitchen. What were they talking about? What did his wife have to tell him? "Hello," he said loudly, entering the kitchen. Nyela and Urias started and moved away from each other. They were standing by the window, and Cordell thought they had been standing much closer just a moment ago. "Cordell!" Nyela looked frightened. "We didn't hear you come in." "I can tell," he replied dryly. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing much." Urias smiled tensely. "Just helping Nyela with a clogged sink. For the umpteenth time this week." Cordell didn't hide his sarcasm. "Urias was just passing by and decided to stop in," Nyela said quickly. "Would you like some coffee or dinner?" "No," Cordell said curtly. "I'm going to take a shower." He left the kitchen feeling anger building inside him. Something was going on behind his back, and he intended to find out what it was. When Cordell came out of the shower, Urias was gone. Nyela was bustling about in the kitchen preparing dinner. She seemed nervous and avoided his gaze. "What were you discussing with Julius?" Cordell asked, sitting down at the table. "Nothing important," Nyela shrugged. "Just chatting." "About what exactly?" "All sorts of things. The weather, how expensive gasoline is getting." Nyela turned away toward the stove. "The usual." Cordell knew his wife was lying, but decided not to press her. Not yet. Instead, he said, "I don't want him coming over when I'm not home." Nyela spun around. "What? Why?" "I don't like it. He shouldn't be hanging around here when I'm not here." "But he helps around the house, and he's your stepfather, practically family." "No, not family," Cordell snapped. "My family is you and me, no one else." Nyela pursed her lips but said nothing. They spent the rest of the evening in tense silence, pretending to watch TV. That night, Cordell had trouble falling asleep. Nyela pretended to be asleep next to him, but he could tell she was awake too. He was tormented by suspicions, but he was afraid to act on them. Just as he was drifting off, he remembered the strange conversation in the kitchen. This can't go on, Nyela. What couldn't go on? What had they been talking about? The next day, Cordell got off work early and decided to stop by the supermarket where Nyela worked. He rarely went there during her shift, preferring to shop on weekends, but today he wanted to see her. Upon entering the store, he immediately noticed Chantel stocking shelves. Nyela was not at the register. "Hi, Chantel," he said, approaching the woman. "Have you seen Nyela?" Chantel looked surprised. "She's not here today. She took the day off." "The day off?" Cordell asked. "She didn't say anything. Maybe she forgot?" Chantel was clearly uncomfortable. "You know, I've got a lot on my mind." "Yeah, I bet." Cordell looked at her intently. "Do you know where she might be?" "No idea," Chantel replied too quickly. "Listen, I have to get back to work. The manager is already giving me the evil eye." Cordell nodded and left the store. Instead of going home, he decided to drive around town for a while. Something inside him told him that something was wrong. Nyela never took a day off without telling him. Driving past the Blue Ridge Motel on the outskirts of town, Cordell noticed a familiar black pickup truck in the parking lot. His heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. He drove slowly past, memorizing the room number next to which Julius's pickup was parked. 12. Cordell parked in the far corner of the lot, where he had a clear view of the entrance to room 12. He didn't know what he would do if his suspicions were confirmed. Part of him wanted to burst into the room right now, and part of him wanted to drive away and never come back. He sat in his car for about an hour when the door opened. Julius came out first, looked around and waved. Nyella appeared behind him, and Cordell felt the ground disappear beneath his feet, his wife, and his stepfather. Cordell struggled to keep himself from jumping out of the car. He watched as Urias kissed Nyella goodbye, then got into the pickup truck and drove away. Nyella got into her car, which Cordell hadn't noticed before. It was parked on the other side of the motel. When both cars were out of sight, Cordell started the engine. His hands were shaking, and only one thought was pounding in his head. They're going to pay for this. He didn't go home. He couldn't see Nyella right now, afraid he'd lose it. Instead, he drove to Johnny's bar, where the police sometimes gathered after their shift. The bartender nodded at him. "Hello, Officer Maddox, the usual?" "Double whiskey," Cordell replied, sitting down at the bar. He wasn't a heavy drinker, but today he needed something stronger than beer. The bartender set a glass in front of him, and Cordell downed it in one gulp. The hot liquid burned his throat, but it was almost pleasant. The physical pain distracted him from the emotional pain. "Another one," he said, pushing the empty glass toward the bartender. By the time he was on his third drink, Cordell's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Nyella. He dismissed the call. A minute later, the phone rang again. Cordell turned it off. He sat in the bar until closing time, lost in dark thoughts. The bartender called him a taxi. Cordell was too drunk to drive. When he got home well after midnight, he found Nayla awake. She was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, looking worried. "Where were you?" she asked. "I called the station and they said you left a long time ago." Cordell looked at her, not recognizing the woman he had lived with for 7 years. How could she? With his stepfather? "You took the day off today," he said instead of answering. "You didn't tell me." Nyella tensed. "Yes, I had a headache and decided to rest." "At the Blue Ridge Motel?" Cordell saw her face turn pale. "With Julius?" "Cordell, I can explain," Nyella began, but he cut her off. "No, don't. I saw everything with my own eyes." He turned and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Nyella called after him. "Away from you," he replied, slamming the door. Cordell spent the night in his car, parked at a lookout point outside of town. In the morning, he was awakened by the phone he had left on before going to sleep. An unfamiliar number. "Maddox," he answered hoarsely. "Officer Maddox?" asked a male voice. "There's something you need to know about your wife and your stepfather." Cordell sat up straight, wide awake. "Who is this?" "It doesn't matter," the voice replied. "What matters is that your wife and Julius Browning have been sleeping together for over a year. And there's something else you should know. Ask Julius about his health, about what he's hiding from everyone." The call ended. Cordell stared at the phone, feeling himself grow cold. Who could have called him? And what was Julius's health condition? The anonymous call wouldn't leave Cordell alone. He returned home after a sleepless night in his car and found that Nyella had already left for work. There was a note on the kitchen table. "We need to talk. I love you." Cordell crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash can. The words of love sounded like mockery after what he had seen with his own eyes. He took a shower, got dressed, and dialed the station's number. "Sam, it's Maddox. Listen, I need to take a couple of days off for family reasons. Can you cover for me?" His colleague agreed without asking any questions. Everyone at the police station understood that sometimes you need time for personal matters. Cordell got into his car and drove to Harris Teeter, where Nyella worked. He parked across the street, where he had a clear view of the entrance. It was 9 in the morning. Nyella's shift was supposed to start at 8. About an hour passed before he saw his wife leaving the store. She wasn't alone. Chantel was walking beside her, and they were talking animatedly about something. Nyella looked upset. The women got into Nyella's car and drove away. Cordell followed them, keeping his distance. The surveillance skills he had learned in police training now came in handy. Nyella and Chantel arrived at a cafe on the other side of town. Cordell parked across the street and watched as they took a table by the window. He took the binoculars he always kept in his car for surveillance during his shifts out of the glove compartment. Through the cafe window, he could see Nyella talking emotionally, while Chantel listened with a sympathetic expression on her face. At one point, Nyella took out her phone, showed something on the screen, and both women looked at the image with concern. About an hour later, they left the cafe and got back into the car. This time, they drove in the direction of the Blue Ridge Motel. Cordell's heart sank. Was Nyella really going to meet Urias right now? But the car drove past the motel and stopped outside a family planning clinic. Nyella got out while Chantel remained in the car. Cordell frowned. What had his wife forgotten at this clinic? Nyella stayed inside for about half an hour. When she came out, she was holding a small paper bag, presumably containing medication. She looked depressed. The next stop was Chantel's house. The women went inside, and Cordell decided he'd had enough for one day. It was unlikely that Nyella was going to meet with Julius with Chantel in tow. He drove home, thinking about what he had seen. Why would Nyella need to go to a family planning clinic? They had never discussed children. Nyella had always said she wasn't ready, and Cordell hadn't pressed the issue. Could she be pregnant? By Julius? The thought hit him like a punch in the gut. Cordell parked at home and sat in his car for a long time, trying to collect his thoughts. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a message from the clinic where he had his annual checkup last week. "Your results are ready. Please schedule an appointment with your doctor to pick them up." Cordell frowned. Usually the results were simply sent by email, and only if something serious was found would they ask you to come in person. He dialed the clinic's number. "This is Officer Maddox. I received a message about my medical exam results being ready." "Yes, Mr. Maddox," the administrator replied. "Dr. Green would like to discuss them with you in person. Can you come in today?" "What's the matter? Is it serious?" Pause. "I'm not allowed to discuss test results over the phone, Mr. Maddox, but I would recommend that you come in as soon as possible." Cordell felt a chill run down his spine. "Okay, I'll be there in an hour." Dr. Green's office was cool. The air conditioner hummed quietly, creating a background noise that calmed Cordell's nerves a little. He sat across from the doctor, who was staring intently at the computer monitor, reviewing the test results. "Mr. Maddox," Dr. Green finally said, taking off his glasses. "I don't have very good news." Cordell tensed. "Your blood test came back positive for HIV." The world around him seemed to freeze. Cordell heard the doctor continue to talk about confirmatory tests, modern treatments, and how with the right approach, he could live a normal life. But none of the words made sense. Only one thought ran through his head. "HIV? I have HIV. How is this possible?" Cordell finally managed to say. I'm not in the high-risk group." Dr. Green looked at him sympathetically. HIV can be transmitted through unprotected sexual contact with an infected partner, regardless of gender or orientation. "You're married, right?" Cordell nodded, unable to say a word. "I would recommend that your wife also get tested as soon as possible," said the doctor. "And anyone you've had intimate contact with in the last, let's say, couple of years." "Everyone I've had intimate contact with," thought Cordell. Only Nyella, only his wife, who had cheated on him with Urias. He remembered the words from the anonymous call, "Ask Julius about his health." And Nyella's visit to the family planning clinic today. Did she already know? Could Julius? "Mr. Maddox?" The doctor's voice brought him back to reality. "You need time to process this information. That's normal. But it's important to start treatment as soon as possible. I'll write you a referral to an infectious disease specialist." Cordell nodded mechanically, took the prescription, and left the office, feeling like a completely different person than the one who had entered half an hour earlier. On the way home, he stopped at a liquor store and bought a bottle of whiskey. He needed something to numb the pain and rage boiling inside him. He wouldn't believe what was happening. It had to be some kind of monstrous mistake, or a nightmare from which he was about to wake up. At home, Cordell poured himself a glass of whiskey and drank it in one gulp. Then another. The alcohol burned his throat, but brought no relief. His phone rang on the table. It was Nyella. He dismissed the call. The phone rang again. "What do you want?" he replied gruffly. "Cordell," Nyela's voice sounded alarmed. "We need to talk. I'm coming home." "Don't bother," he hissed through clenched teeth. "Please," she said, her voice breaking with tears. "This is important." "You have no idea how important." Cordell hung up and threw the phone on the table. Half an hour later, he heard Nyela's car pull up. The front door opened, and his wife entered the house. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. "Cordell," Nyela began, taking a step toward him. "I need to talk to you." "About what?" He remained seated at the table, staring at her coldly. "About how you're fucking my stepfather in a cheap motel?" Nyela flinched as if she had been slapped. "I can explain." "There's nothing to explain." Cordell slammed his fist on the table. "I saw it with my own eyes! Yesterday, at the Blue Ridge Motel. You and Urias." Nyela paled. "Listen, it's not what you think." "What am I supposed to think?" Cordell stood up, towering over her. "That you have friendly get-togethers with him in motel rooms?" "No." Nyela lowered her eyes. "I won't deny it. Yes, Urias and I have a relationship." Those words, spoken aloud, were like a knife to the heart. It was one thing to suspect, but quite another to hear the confession from his wife's lips. "How long has this been going on?" Cordell asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Nyela paused, then replied, "Over a year. A year." His wife had been sleeping with another man for a whole year, with his stepfather. Cordell felt nausea rising in his throat. "Why?" was all he could ask. Nyela looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "You were always busy. Work, extra shifts, shooting ranges on weekends. You stopped noticing me, Cordell. But Urias, he always had time for me. He listened to me. He cared." "Cared?" Cordell smiled bitterly. "Enough to infect you with HIV?" Nyela froze, her eyes wide. What did you say? Did you heard me perfectly well." Cordell took the prescription he had received from the doctor out of his pocket and threw it on the table. "I found out about my diagnosis today. I wonder where I got it, considering I've never cheated on you." "No." Nyela shook her head, stepping back. "No, that can't be." "It can." Cordell watched as she sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. "Did Urias know about his status?" Nyela looked up at him, her eyes filled with horror. I don't know. He never said." "Have you been tested?" Cordell interrupted her. "Today," she replied quietly. "Chantel took me to the clinic. The results will be back in a few days." Cordell looked at his wife and didn't recognize her. The woman he had lived with for 7 years, whom he trusted, whom he loved. Who was she really? "Call him," Cordell said after a long pause. "Call your lover. Tell him to come here, right now." "Cordell, I don't think that's a good idea." "Call him," he barked, "or I'll do it myself. And believe me, you don't want me calling Julius in this state." Nyela shuddered and took out her phone and dialed the number. After a short conversation, she reported, "He'll be here in 20 minutes. The wait was agonizing. Nyela sat in the kitchen without looking up, while Cordell paced the living room, periodically taking a sip from his glass of whiskey. A storm of emotions raged inside him: pain, betrayal, fear, rage. He didn't know what he would say to Julius when he arrived. He didn't know if he would be able to control himself and not attack him. Finally, there was a knock at the door. Nyela jumped up, but Cordell stopped her with a gesture. "I'll get it." Urias stood in the doorway, shifting nervously from foot to foot. When he saw Cordell's face, he backed away, but it was too late. Cordell grabbed him by the collar and dragged him into the house. "What the hell, Cordell?" Urias exclaimed, struggling to free himself. "What's going on?" "You ask me what's going on?" Cordell took a step toward him, clenching his fists. "You've been fucking my wife for over a year, and you ask me what's going on?" Urias glanced at Nyela, who was standing in the kitchen doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. "Did you tell him?" he asked. "She didn't tell me," Cordell replied. "I saw it myself. Yesterday at the motel." Urias paled. "Listen, son." "I'm not your son!" Cordell felt rage welling up inside him with renewed force. "You've never been a father to me. You just latched onto my mother, and when she died, you decided my wife would be good for you? It's not like that. Urias raised his hands in a defensive gesture. Nayela and I, it just happened. We didn't mean to hurt you. Didn't mean to hurt me? Cordell laughed bitterly. What about the fact that you're killing me? Slowly but surely. Urias looked at him in confusion. What are you talking about? About your little gift. Cordell stepped closer, looking Urias straight in the eyes. About the fact that you infected us all with HIV? Urias's face changed. From frightened, it became detached, as if a mask had fallen away. You know, he said quietly. Who told you? Cordell felt the ground slip away from under his feet. Until that moment, there had been a tiny hope that it was a mistake, that the anonymous call was just a cruel joke. But now... You knew, Cordell said, feeling everything inside him grow cold. You knew about your diagnosis and you slept with her anyway. With me. Behind him, Nayela made a strange sound, something between a sob and a moan. You knew? She asked in a trembling voice. You knew all this time and didn't say anything to me? Urias lowered his head. I found out about a year ago, by accident during a routine checkup. The doctor said that with modern medication I could live a normal life. And you decided that you had the right to make that decision for all of us? Cordell's voice trembled with rage. Do you realize that this is a criminal offense? Deliberately infecting someone with HIV? I didn't want to infect anyone, Urias exclaimed. I hoped I wasn't contagious. The doctor said that if I took the medication, the viral load would become undetectable and I couldn't infect anyone. But you didn't take the medication, he said, not as a question but as a statement. Urias looked away. I started, but then I stopped. It's expensive and I don't have insurance, and I felt fine, no symptoms. You're an idiot, Cordell hissed. A sick, selfish idiot. You ruined our lives. Nayela approached Urias, her face contorted with anger and pain. How could you? She whispered. I trusted you. I risked everything for you and you. Nayela, baby. Urias tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. I didn't mean to hurt you. I love you. Don't you dare. Nayela took another step back. Don't you dare talk about love. You knew you could infect me, and you did it anyway. Enough, Cordell interrupted. Both of you, get out of my house, now. Nayela turned to him. Cordell, please. Get out, he shouted, pointing to the door. Both of you. I don't want to see you. Urias hesitantly moved toward the door. Cordell, we need to talk about this calmly. About treatment, about... The only thing we're going to talk about is your statement to the police, Cordell cut him off. And believe me, I'll make sure you get the maximum sentence. You won't do that, Urias tried to sound confident, but his voice betrayed his fear. You won't make this public. Think about your reputation, your job. I don't care. Cordell stepped toward him, looking him straight in the eye. You ruined my life. Now I'm going to ruin yours. Nayela stood between them, tears streaming down her face. Cordell, please, let's talk about this. I know I'm to blame, but go away, Cordell said quietly, not looking at her. Just go. Where? Her voice sounded desperate. I don't care. Go to him. To Chantel, to the motel, anywhere but here. I can't look at you right now. Nayela sobbed and rushed into the bedroom. A few minutes later, she came out with a small bag. I'll call you, she said, stopping in the doorway. When you calm down. Don't bother, Cordell replied without turning around. Julia stood uncertainly at the door. Cordell, Get out! Cordell didn't even turn toward him. And pray that I don't find you before the police do. The door closed, and Cordell was left alone. He heard 2 cars start up, Nayela's car and Julius's pickup truck. The sound of the engines grew fainter until it disappeared into the evening silence. Cordell slowly sank down onto the sofa and covered his face with his hands. His life had been destroyed in an instant. The wife he had trusted had betrayed him with a man he despised. And now he had HIV, a disease that would be with him for the rest of his life, whatever that might be. He raised his head and looked at the bottle of whiskey on the table. He reached for it but stopped. Alcohol wouldn't solve his problems. He needed to think, to decide what to do next. And first of all, he had to deal with Julius. Cordell took out his phone and dialed the station number. "Hillsborough Police Department," said the familiar voice of Sergeant Dixon. "Dixon, it's Maddox. I need to talk to Detective Duvernay. It's urgent." Detective Jahir Duvernay cursed early calls, especially on his day off. He was just about to make himself a hearty breakfast when the phone rang. Now, looking at the bodies lying in the living room of a modest house on the outskirts of Hillsborough, he knew that breakfast would be postponed indefinitely. "Time of death?" he asked the medical examiner, an elderly Dr. Castillo who was bent over the woman's body. "Preliminary estimate is between 10 o'clock and 2 a.m., the doctor replied without looking up. "I'll have a more accurate time after the autopsy." Duvernay nodded and glanced around the room. It was a typical living room in a typical house, except for the two corpses and the blood splattered on the walls and furniture. The woman, an African-American in her 30s, lay against the wall with a gunshot wound to the chest. The man, also African-American, about 55 years old, was in the center of the room with 2 bullet holes in his chest and 1 in his head. "Who are they?" Duvernay asked the patrol officer who was first to arrive at the scene. "Nyella Maddox and Urias Browning," the officer replied, checking his notebook. "The house belongs to Nyella and her husband, Cordell Maddox." Duvernay froze. "Maddox? Officer Maddox from our precinct?" "Yes, sir," nodded the patrolman. "His wife and, as I understand from the documents, his stepfather." Duvernay felt his stomach tighten. He knew Cordell Maddox. Not well, but well enough to consider him a good cop and a decent man. Quiet, efficient, never in trouble. "Who found the bodies?" "A neighbor, Chantal Quezada." The officer pointed toward the kitchen, where a woman was sitting in tears, answering questions from another detective. "She says she came to check on Nyella because she wasn't answering her phone. The door was ajar. She went in and... You saw it yourself." "Where's Maddox?" Duvernay asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. "We don't know, sir. We're trying to get in touch with him." Duvernay nodded and headed toward the forensic technician who was photographing the crime scene. "What do we have?" "2 bodies, 3 9mm shell casings," replied the forensic technician, without looking up from his camera. "Judging by the location, the man was killed first, then the woman. She seems to have tried to escape. There are bloodstains leading from the center of the room to the wall." "Any weapons?" "None found. The apartment has been ransacked, drawers pulled out, things scattered everywhere. Looks like a robbery." Duvernay frowned. It was too neat a robbery. Valuables such as the TV and stereo system were still there. "Check if any money or jewelry is missing," he said, "and I want to know what kind of service weapon Officer Maddox was carrying." The detective approached Chantal Quezada. The woman looked devastated. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her hands were shaking. "Miss Quezada, I'm Detective Duvernay," he introduced himself, sitting down across from her. "My condolences. I understand this is difficult for you, but I need to ask you a few questions." Chantal nodded, wiping away her tears. "When was the last time you spoke to Nyella?" "Yesterday afternoon," Chantal replied in a trembling voice. "She was at my place, very upset. Cordell kicked her out of the house." "Why?" Chantal hesitated, looking away. "It's personal." "Miss Quezada, this is a double homicide investigation," Duvernay said gently but firmly. "There is nothing personal that could justify withholding information." Chantal took a deep breath. "Nyella was having an affair with Julius, Cordell's stepfather. Cordell found out a few days ago and was furious. And yesterday it came out that Julius, he had HIV and he knew about it but didn't tell Nyella. And Cordell got infected too." Duvernay felt something tighten in his chest. Now that was a motive. A real, serious motive for murder. "Was Nyella at your place yesterday?" "Yes, but she left in the morning," Chantal replied. "She said she had arranged to meet with Julius to have a serious talk. I offered to go with her, but she refused. She said it was their problem, and they had to work it out themselves." "Did she mention that she might be meeting her husband?" "No." Chantal shook her head. "She was afraid of him. I'd never seen Cordell like that before. He was always calm, even a little distant. But the day he found out, he was like an animal." Duvernay made a note in his notebook. "Miss Quezada, Do you know if Nyella has any relatives we should notify? Just a sister in Atlanta, Chantel replied. She has a different last name. Parker, I think. I don't remember her first name. Thanks for your help, Duvernay said, standing up. If you remember anything else that might be important, please contact me. He left his business card and went outside to make a call. Cordell Maddox's phone was unavailable, which increased the detective's concern. He dialed the station number. Sergeant, this is Duvernay. Did Officer Maddox report for duty today? No, he took a few days off for family reasons, the sergeant replied. Is something wrong? His wife and stepfather were found dead in their home, Duvernay reported grimly. I want to put Maddox on the lookout, not as a suspect, he quickly added, but as someone who may have information about the crime. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Duvernay didn't want the entire precinct to immediately know that one of their officers was the prime suspect in a double murder. Understood, the sergeant said after a pause. Anything else? Yes. Check to see if Maddox took his service weapon when he went on vacation. An hour later, the crime scene investigators finished their work, and the bodies were taken to the morgue. Duvernay returned to the station, where news awaited him. Maddox's service weapon, a Glock 17, was with him when he left on vacation. The shell casings found at the crime scene matched the caliber, according to a preliminary assessment by a ballistics expert. Duvernay sat at his desk, looking through Maddox's personnel file. 12 years of impeccable service, several commendations from his superiors, no disciplinary action. Married for 7 years, no children. His mother died 3 years ago of cancer. His father is unknown. His stepfather, Julius Browning, married Maddox's mother when he was 15. There was a knock at the door. Come in, said Duvernay without looking up from his papers. A young officer entered the office. Detective, we checked the surveillance cameras around Maddox's house. There's a recording from the gas station across the street. At 11:10 p.m., Maddox's car leaves the area. In what direction? West, toward the interstate. Duvernay nodded. Check all the cameras at the exits from the city in that direction, and send a description of Maddox's car to all patrols. The officer left, and Duvernay returned to his papers. The picture was gradually coming together, and it wasn't pretty. A deceived husband discovers that his wife is cheating on him with his stepfather. Then he finds out that he has been infected with HIV because of their relationship. Motive? More than enough. Opportunity? He had the keys to the house and a gun. Alibi? None found yet. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Duvernay. Detective, this is Dr. Castillo from the morgue. I have the preliminary autopsy results. What's the news? The cause of death in both cases is gunshot wounds. The man was shot 3 times, twice in the chest and once in the head. The woman was shot once, in the heart. The shots were fired at close range, no more than 2 meters. Time of death was approximately between 10:30 and 11 p.m. That coincides with the time Maddox's car was seen leaving the area. Anything else? Yes, HIV was found in the man's blood as expected from witness statements. It's quite advanced, and it appears he wasn't taking any medication. Thank you, Doctor. Duvernay hung up and leaned back in his chair. The case was becoming clearer, but something still bothered him. If Maddox had planned the murder, why hadn't he thought of an alibi? Why hadn't he gotten rid of his weapon? Why had he left in his own car, which was easy to trace? Duvernay knew the answer. It was a crime of passion. Maddox hadn't planned the murder, he'd just snapped. It often happens in family tragedies, especially when infidelity is involved. The phone rang. Detective, this is Officer Thompson. Maddox's car has been found in the parking lot of the Pine Grove Motel, 40 kilometers from the city. Is he there? No, sir, but the manager says a man matching Maddox's description checked in last night. He paid cash and registered under the name John Smith. I'll be right there. Duvernay grabbed his jacket and ran out of the office. 45 minutes later, the detective and 2 patrol officers pulled up to the motel, a typical roadside establishment with a row of single-story buildings and a neon sign, some of the letters of which were not working. The manager, a heavy-set man with thinning hair, became nervous when he realized he was talking to the police. I don't know anything, he said before Duvernay could ask a question. He just got a room, paid for 2 nights in advance, and that's it. Do you recognize him? The detective showed the clerk a photo of Maddox from his file. The clerk nodded. Yes, that's him. He just looked, I don't know, kind of lost. His eyes were red, his hands were shaking. What room is he staying in? Number 7, the clerk said, handing over a spare key. But I haven't seen him since this morning. Duvernay took the key and headed for room 7 with the officers. They stopped at the door, and the detective gestured to the officers to stand on either side, weapons at the ready. Maddox! Duvernay called loudly, knocking on the door. This is Detective Duvernay. Open the door. We need to talk. Silence. Duvernay knocked again, louder. Maddox, I know you're in there. Let's settle this peacefully. Again, no answer. The detective nodded to the officers and inserted the key into the lock. The door opened, and they cautiously entered, keeping their weapons at the ready. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, and there was an empty whiskey bottle and a glass on the table. In the bathroom, there were several disposable razors and a toothbrush. There were no signs of a struggle or a hasty escape. He was here, said one of the officers, pointing to the trash can where a sandwich wrapper with the logo of a nearby gas station lay. Duvernay nodded and began to examine the room more closely. Under the pillow, he found a note written in neat handwriting. I know you're looking for me. I did what I had to do. They deserved it. Cordell Maddox. It was like a confession. Duvernay folded the note and put it in his pocket. Check everything around here, he ordered the officers. He couldn't have gotten far on foot. They searched the motel grounds and the nearby woods, but Maddox was nowhere to be found. The owner of the nearest gas station said he had seen a man matching Maddox's description early that morning. He had bought a sandwich and coffee, but he hadn't seen where he went after that. Duvernay returned to the city and reported the situation to his superiors. A manhunt was launched for Cordell Maddox as a suspect in the double murder. His photo appeared in the news and at all police stations within a 100-kilometer radius. 3 days of searching yielded no results. Maddox had vanished into thin air. Duvernay spent hours poring over the case, reviewing evidence and witness statements. Everything pointed to Maddox, but the detective still felt like he was missing something. On the 4th day, when Duvernay was about to go home after another fruitless shift, a gamekeeper from a national park 60 kilometers from the city called the station. I saw the wanted notice on the news, he said. I think your man is here. He introduced himself as a tourist who had rented a cabin for a week 3 days ago. He paid in cash and didn't show any ID, but it's definitely him. I recognized him from the photo. Duvernay immediately organized a capture team. An hour later, 5 unmarked police cars pulled up at the park's border, where the gamekeeper was waiting for them. The cabin is 3 kilometers from here, he said, pointing to a forest path. It's isolated, no one around. They left their cars and moved on foot, keeping quiet. When the cabin appeared among the trees, Duvernay gestured to the others to surround it. He cautiously approached the window and peered inside. Cordell Maddox sat at the table with a gun in front of him. He stared straight ahead with a blank look, as if he couldn't see anything around him. Duvernay moved away from the window and radioed the others that the suspect was inside and armed. Then he approached the door and knocked loudly. Madou, this is Detective Duvernay. Come out with your hands up. The house is surrounded. There was a movement inside, then a voice. I knew you'd find me. Come out without a weapon, Maddox. Let's settle this peacefully. Peacefully? A bitter laugh. It's too late for peace, Detective. It's never too late, replied Duvernay. Come out and we'll talk. A long pause, then. Come in. I won't resist. Duvernay cautiously opened the door, keeping his gun at the ready. Maddox was sitting at the table, his hands resting palm up on the tabletop. The gun lay nearby. Step away from the gun, Duvernay ordered. Maddox slowly stood up and took a step to the side. The detective quickly entered and grabbed the pistol, putting it in his pocket. Then he searched Maddox and, finding no other weapons, sat him back down at the table. Cordell Maddox, you're under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Nyella Maddox and Julius Browning, Duvernay began, reading his rights. You have the right to remain silent. I know my rights, Maddox interrupted. I'm a cop, remember? You were a cop, Duvernay corrected him. Maddox nodded, his eyes showing a strange mixture of humility and relief. I'm not going to deny it, he said. I killed them. Even though this confession was expected, Duvernay still felt a pang of disappointment. Deep down, he had hoped he was wrong, that Maddox was innocent. Tell me what happened, the detective said, sitting down across from him. Maddox took a deep breath. After I kicked them out of the house, I couldn't calm down. I drank all night, thinking about what they had done to me. Nayela, I loved her, and she slept with that man, my stepfather, for over a year, and he knew he was sick, but he kept sleeping with her, with me. Maddox's voice trembled. In the morning, I went to a motel just wanting to get drunk and forget everything, but I couldn't. Their betrayal was eating away at me. He fell silent, gathering his thoughts. In the evening, I went back home. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to get some more things. Maybe I hoped it would all turn out to be a bad dream. And I saw them there, together, in my house. They were sitting on my couch, drinking my whiskey and laughing. Maddox's eyes darkened with the memory. I don't remember how I got the gun. All I remember is their frightened faces and the shots. First him, then she ran for the door and I shot her in the back. Why didn't you give yourself up right away? Asked Duvernay. I don't know. Maddox shook his head. I just left. I wanted to think, decide what to do next, but deep down, I knew you'd find me. Duvernay nodded. Everything matched the evidence and witness statements. It was a classic crime of jealousy and revenge, with a clear motive and irrefutable evidence. Do you understand what's in store for you? Asked the detective. Prison, Maddox replied simply. A long time, maybe life. But you know what? I don't care. My life ended the moment I found out about Nayela's betrayal and that I had HIV. Whatever the court decides, it can't be worse than that. Duvernay handcuffed Maddox and led him out of the hut. The officers waiting outside looked at their former colleague with surprise and sadness. No one said a word. What could they say? The walk back to the cars was silent. Back in town, as they approached the station, Duvernay finally spoke. Why did you leave a note at the motel? Did you want us to find you? Maddox looked at him with empty eyes. I didn't leave any note. Duvernay turned to him in surprise. Under the pillow in the motel. I know you're looking for me. I did what I had to do. They deserved it. Maddox frowned. I didn't write anything like that. Maybe it was... He paused, then shook his head. It doesn't matter. I'm guilty anyway. Duvernay wanted to ask something else, but they had already pulled up to the station, where a crowd of reporters and onlookers had gathered, attracted by the news of the arrest of a police officer who had killed someone. That evening, sitting in his office, Duvernay reviewed the case files, preparing for tomorrow's interrogation. Everything was clear and understandable, the motive, the opportunity, the confession. But something still bothered him. That note. Why did Maddox deny writing it? He took the note out of the evidence bag and examined it closely. The handwriting was neat, without mistakes, as if written by someone who had carefully considered every word. It didn't look like the note of a killer, acting in the heat of the moment. Detective? There was a knock at the door, and a young officer entered. You have a call from the lab. They say it's urgent. Duvernay picked up the phone. Duvernay here. Detective, this is Marcus from the crime lab. We have some interesting results on the Maddox case. We checked the fingerprints on the shell casings found at the crime scene. And? They don't belong to Maddox. They're Julius Browning's fingerprints. Duvernay felt a chill run down his spine. What? That's impossible. I double-checked, Marcus replied. The prints are clear, a perfect match. Browning must have held those shell casings, possibly while loading the gun. And there's something else. Gunpowder on his hands. He fired the weapon shortly before he died. Duvernay slowly put down the phone. The picture of what had happened suddenly began to change in his mind. What if Maddox hadn't shot at them? What if it was some other story? He got up and quickly went to the holding cell where Maddox was being kept. Cordell, he said, sitting down opposite the prisoner. I want you to tell me everything again. Every detail, and this time, the truth. Maddox looked up at him with tired eyes. I already told you everything. I killed them. Then explain to me why the fingerprints on the shell casings are Browning's, not yours? And why are there traces of gunpowder on his hands? Maddox froze, then looked away. I don't know. You're lying. Duvernay leaned closer. Why are you taking the blame for something you didn't do? Maddox was silent for a long time, then looked up at the detective. Because I wanted to kill them, he said quietly. I went to the house with a gun, with the intention of doing just that. But when I got there, they were already dead. Duvernay frowned. What happened? Maddox leaned back in his chair and began to speak as if unburdening himself. I came home in the evening, as I said. I was drunk, angry, wanted to take some more things. And yes, in a sense I wanted to kill them. That thought had been haunting me ever since I found out about the affair and the HIV. But when I opened the door, the living room was dark, with only the light from the kitchen shining in. I saw their silhouettes and took out my gun. But then I turned on the light and realized they were already dead. What did you do? At first I thought about calling the police, but then Maddox shook his head. I realized I'd be the prime suspect anyway. I had a motive, an opportunity. Who would believe I didn't kill them? I took Urias's gun, which was lying next to him, and drove away. I just wanted to disappear. You're saying that Julius shot Niella and then himself? I don't know. Maddox shrugged. Maybe. Or Niella shot him and then herself. I didn't see what happened. Duvernay thought for a moment. The story sounded implausible, but the evidence. Browning's fingerprints on the shell casings, gunpowder on his hands. Why didn't you tell the truth right away? What difference does it make? Maddox smiled bitterly. I wanted to kill them. I had already committed the crime in my mind. They're dead anyway, and I'll be dead soon, too. Late-stage HIV, remember? Duvernay returned to his office and sat there for a long time, thinking. Maddox's story was strange, but not impossible. He called the forensic expert and asked him to check all the evidence again. The results came back 2 days later. Analysis of the bullet trajectories showed that all the shots had been fired from the position where Browning had been standing. The suicide note found in Niella's pocket had her fingerprints and traces of her tears on it. Forgive me, I can't live like this. The picture gradually became clear. Urias, upon learning of his diagnosis and realizing that he had infected Niella and Cordell, decided to end it all. He shot Niella and then himself. Maddox, returning home, found them dead and, in shock, decided to take the blame. The charges against Maddox were dropped, although his police career was, of course, over. Duvernay last saw him outside the courthouse after the case was closed. What are you going to do now? The detective asked. I don't know, Maddox replied. I'll start treatment. Maybe move somewhere where no one knows me. Try to find a way to live with what happened. Duvernay nodded. Good luck, Cordell. Thanks, detective. Maddox held out his hand and Duvernay shook it. For getting to the truth, although it might have been easier if I'd just served my time. The truth always matters, Duvernay replied. Even when it doesn't bring relief. Maddox nodded and left, and Duvernay stood watching him go. The story made him think about how little we know even about those closest to us. Niella, who cheated on her husband with his stepfather. Julius, who hid a terminal illness. Cordell, who was willing to take the blame for a murder he didn't commit. On his way home, Duvernay thought about his wife, his friends, and his colleagues. How many secrets did each of them have? How many unspoken words, unspoken grievances, hidden fears? People are like locked rooms, and we can live next to someone for years without knowing what is really going on behind closed doors. In the Maddox Browning case, the truth was not found in a confession or obvious clues, but in small details. Fingerprints on shell casings, traces of gunpowder on hands, the trajectory of bullets. Sometimes it is these inconspicuous details that tell the real story. And this reminded Duvernay why he became a detective, to seek the truth, even when it hides in the shadows of the obvious.